On the first day of this year, that being 1756, you'll recall, we find from Johnson's private devotions that he had then recovered from sickness, and in February that his eye was restored to its use. The pious gratitude with which he acknowledged mercies upon every occasion is very edifying, as is the humble submission which he breathes when it is the will of his heavenly Father to try him with afflictions. As much as such dispositions became the state of man here, and of the true effects of religious discipline, we cannot but venerate in Johnson one of the most exercised minds that our holy religion hath ever formed. If there be any thoughtless enough to suppose such exercise the weakness of a great understanding, let them look up to Johnson and be convinced that what he so earnestly practiced must have a rational foundation. His works this year were an abstract or epitome in an octavo of his folio dictionary and a few essays in a monthly publication entitled The Universal Visitor. Christopher Smart, with whose unhappy vacillation of mind he sincerely sympathized, was one of the stated undertakers of this miscellany, and it was to assist him that Johnson sometimes employed his pen. Wow, 2 whole pages now without footnotes or letters. I'm excited. All the essays marked with 2 asterisks have been ascribed to him, but I am confident from internal evidence that of these neither the Life of Chaucer, Reflections on the State of Portugal, nor an Essay in Architecture were written by him. I am equally confident upon the same evidence that he wrote Further Thoughts on Agriculture, being the sequel of a very inferior essay on the same subject, in which, though carried on as if it by the same hand, is both in thinking and expression so far from it and so strikingly peculiar as to leave no doubt of its true parent, and that he also wrote a dissertation on the state of literature and authors, and a dissertation on the epitaphs written by Pope. The last of these, indeed, he afterwards added to his Idler. Why the essays truly written by him are marked in the same manner with those which he did not write, I cannot explain. But with deference to those who have ascribed to him the 3 essays which I have rejected, they want all the characteristical marks of Johnsonian composition. He engaged also to superintend and contribute largely to another monthly publication entitled The Literary Magazine, or Universal Review, the first number of which came out in May this year. What were his emoluments from this undertaking, and what other writings were employed by it, I have not discovered. He continued to write it, with intermissions, till the 15th number, and I think that he never gave better proofs of the force, acuteness, and vivacity of his mind than in this miscellany, whether we consider his original essays or his reviews of the works of others. The preliminary address to the public is a proof how this great man could embellish with the graces of superior composition, even to so trite a thing as the plan of a magazine. I wish I didn't look so ghastly on here, but if I put it over there, I can't read. So we're stuck with my white, pallid face here. His original essays are An Introduction to the Political State of Great Britain, Remarks on the Militia Bill, Observations on His Britannic Majesty, Treaties with the Empress of Russia and the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, Observations on the Present State of Affairs, and Memoirs of Frederick III, King of Prussia. In all these, he displays extensive political knowledge and sagacity, expressed with uncommon energy and perspicuity, without any of those words which he sometimes took a pleasure in adopting in imitation of Sir Thomas Browne. of those of whose Christian morals he this year gave an edition, with his life prefixed to it, which is one of Johnson's best biographical performances. In one instance, only in those essays, has he indulged his Brownism. Dr. Robinson, the historian, mentioned it to me as having at once convinced him that Johnson was the author of the Memoirs of King Prussia, speaking of the pride which the old king, the father of his hero, took in being master of the tallest regiment in Europe. He says, "To review this towering regiment was his daily pleasure, and to perpetuate it was so much his care that when he met a tall woman he immediately commanded one of his Titanian retinues to marry her, that they might propagate prosperity." For this Anglo-Latin word prosperity, Johnson had, however, the authority of Addison. Whew, okay. His reviews are of the following books: Birch's History of the Royal Society, Murphy's Gray's Inn Journal, Wharton's Essay on the Writings and Genius of Pope, Volume 1, Hampton's Translation of Polybius, Blackwell's Memoirs of the Court of Augustus, Russell's Natural History of Aleppo, Sir Isaac Newton's Argument in Proof of a Deity, Borlas's History of the Isles of Scilly. Oh, sorry. I'm putting myself asleep here. Holmes' Experiments on Bleaching. Brown's Christian Morals. Hales on Distilling Seawater. Ventilators in Ships. And Curing an Ill-Tasted Milk. I'd like to read that one. Lucas's Essay on Waters. Keith's Catalogue of the Scottish Bishops. Brown's History of Jamaica. Philosophical Transactions, Volume XLIX. Mrs. Lennox Translations of Sully's Memoirs. Miscellanies by Elizabeth Harrison. Evans's Map and Account of the Middle Colonies in America. Letter on the Case of Admiral Byng. Appeal to the People concerning Admiral Byng. Hanway's Eighth Day. 8 Days' Journey and Essays on Tea. Ooh, an essay on tea. I'd love to read that. The Cadet, a Military Treatise. Some further particulars in relation to the case of Admiral Byng by a gentleman of Oxford. The conduct of the ministry relating to the present war impartially examined. Now, didn't I read all this in the table of contents earlier? A free inquiry into the nature and origin of evil. All these, from internal evidence, were written by Johnson. Some of them, I know, he avowed, and have marked them with an asterisk accordingly. Mr. Thomas Davies, indeed, ascribed to him the review of Mr. Burke's Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, and Sir John Hawkins, with equal discernment, has inserted it in his collection of Johnson's work. I think he's being a little sarcastic there. Whereas it has no resemblance to Johnson's composition and is well known to have been written by Mr. Murphy, who has acknowledged it to be to me and many others. It is worthy of remark in justice to Johnson's political character, which has been misrepresented as abjectly submissive to power, that his observations of the present state of affairs glow with an animated spirit of constitutional liberty as can be found anywhere. Thus Johnson begins, "The time is now come," to quote Johnson, "in which every Englishman expects to be informed of the national affairs, and in which he has a right to have that expectation gratified. For, whatever may be urged by ministers, of those whom vanity or interest make the followers of ministers, concerning the necessity of confidence in our governors, and the presumption of prying with profane eyes into the recess of policy, It is evident that this reference can be claimed only by councils yet unexecuted, and projects suspended in this deliberation. But when a design has ended in miscarriages or success, when every eye and every ear is witness to general discontent or general satisfaction, it is then a proper time to disentangle confusion and illustrate obscurity, to show by what causes every event was produced and in what effects it is likely to terminate, to lay down with distinct particularity what rumors always huddles in general exclamation or perplexes by indigested narratives, to show whence happiness or calamity is derived and whence it may be expected, and honestly to lay before the people what inquiry can gather of the past and conjecture can estimate of the future. Here we have it assumed as an incontrovertible principle that in this country the people are the superintendents of the conduct and measures of those by whom government is administered. The beneficial effects of which the present reign afforded an illustrious example, when addresses from all parts of the kingdom controlled an audacious attempt to introduce a new power subversive of the crown. A still stronger proof of his patriotic spirit appears in his review of an essay on Waters by Dr. Lucas, of whom, after describing him as a man well known to the world from his daring defiance of power, when he thought it exerted on the side of wrong, Johnson thus speaks, to quote Johnson, "The Irish ministers drove him from his native country by a proclamation in which they charged him with crimes of which they never intended to be called to the proof, and oppressed him by methods equally irresistible by guilt and innocence. Let the man thus driven into exile for having been the friend of his country be received in every other place as confessor of liberty. And let the tools of power be taught in time, that they may rob, but cannot impoverish." End quote. Some of his reviews in this magazine are very short accounts of the pieces noticed, and I mention them only that Dr. Johnson's opinion of the works may be known, but many of them are examples of elaborate criticism in the most masterly style. In his review of the Memoirs of the Court of Augustus, he has the resolution to think and speak from his own mind, regardless of the cant transmitted from age to age in praise of the ancient Romans. Thus, to quote Johnson again, "I know not why anyone but a schoolboy in his declamation should whine over the commonwealth of Rome, which grew great only by the misery of the rest of mankind. The Romans, like others, as soon as they grew rich, grew corrupt, and in their corruption sold the lives and freedoms of themselves and of one another." Again, "A people who, while they were poor, robbed mankind, and as soon as they became rich, robbed one another." In Johnson's review of the Miscellanies in Prose and Verse, published by Elizabeth Harrison, but written by many hands, he gives an eminent proof at once of his orthodoxy and candor. "The authors of this essays in prose seem generally," to quote Johnson, "to have imitated or tried to imitate the conspicuousness and luxuriance of Mrs. Rowe. This, however, is not at all their praise. They have labored to add to her brightness of imagery her purity of sentiments. The poets have had Miss Dr. Watts before their eyes, a writer who, if he stood not in the first class of genius, compensated that defect by a ready application of his powers to the promotion of piety. The attempt to employ the ornaments of romance in the decoration of religion was, I think, first made by Mr. Boyle's Martyrdom of Theodora. But Boyle's philosophical studies did not allow him time for the cultivation of style, and the completion of the great design was reserved for Mrs. Rowe. Dr. Watts was one of the first who taught the dissenters to write and speak like other men by showing them that elegance might consist with piety. They would have both done honor to a better society, for they had that charity which might well make their fallings be forgotten, and with which the whole Christian world might wish for communion. That they were pure from all the heresies of an age, to which every opinion has become a favorite, that the universal church has hitherto detested. Okay. Oh, we're still quoting Johnson here. This praise, the general interest of mankind, requires to be given to writers who please and to do not corrupt, who instruct and do not weary. For to them all human eulogies are vain, whom I believe applauded by angels and numbered with the just. End of quoted Johnson part. Johnson's defensive T, here we go, against Mr. Jones's Hanway's violent attack upon that elegant and popular beverage shows how very well a man of genius can write upon the slightest subject. When he writes, as the Italians say, con amore. I suppose no person ever enjoyed with more relish the infusion of the fragrant leaf than Johnson. The quantities which he drank of it at all hours were so great that his nerves must have been uncommonly strong, not to have been extremely relaxed by such an intemperate use of it. He assured me that he never felt the least inconvenience from it, which is a proof that the fault of his constitution was rather a too great tension of fibers than the contrary. Too much fiber. Mr. Hanway wrote an angry answer to Johnson's review of his essay on tea, and Johnson, after a full and deliberate pause, made a reply to it. The only instance, I believe, in the whole course of his life when he condescended to oppose anything that was written against him. I suppose when he thought of any of his little antagonists, he was ever justly aware of the high sentiments of Ajax and Ovid. To quote in Latin, of course, as I am very fluent in, Iste tulit pretium jam nunc certaminus hujus qui cum victus erit mecum certasse feriter, which of course translates as, losing he wins, because his name will be ennobled by defeat, who durst contend with me. And that's of course from the Metamorphosis of Ovid. But indeed, the good Mr. Hanways laid himself so open to ridicule that Johnson's animadversions upon his attack were chiefly to make sport. The generosity with which he pleads the cause of Admiral Byng is highly to the honor of his heart and spirit. Though Voltaire affects to be witty upon the fate of that unfortunate officer, observing that he was shot pour encourager les autres, the nation has long been satisfied that his life was sacrificed to the political fervor of the times. In the vault belonging to the Torrington family in the church of Southill in Bedfordshire, there is the following epitaph upon his monument, which I have transcribed. I will read this transcription now. To the perpetual disgrace of public justice, the Honorable John Byng, Esquire, Admiral of the Blue, fell a martyr to political persecution, March 14th in the year 1757, when bravery and loyalty were insufficient securities for the life and honor of a naval officer. Well, we'll stop there. Wow. Till next time, bye from Boswell.